Stability was the word before the tournament. Consequence was the word after it. That is the brutal contradiction at the heart of Steve Clarke's Scotland exit. A few weeks ago, Scotland were talking about planning, continuity, long-term growth, and a manager trusted to lead the national team toward 2030. Then the World Cup actually began. 3 group games later, Scotland were not preparing for a knockout tie. They were waiting on other people's results, staring at the table, watching the dream shrink from possibility into mathematics, and then from mathematics into goodbye. And that is why this story matters. It is not just that Steve Clarke resigned. Managers leave jobs all the time. What makes this different is the timing. Scotland waited 28 years to return to the Men's World Cup. They arrived with a generation of supporters desperate to believe this time would be different. They had an expanded tournament format that gave third-place teams a chance to survive. They had a manager who had restored Scotland to major tournaments after years in the wilderness. And still, the ending was painfully familiar. The campaign began with hope, because of course it did. Scotland were back on the world stage, and for the Tartan Army, that alone carried emotional weight. Their first match gave them exactly what they needed on paper. A win over Haiti. Not glamorous, not dominant, but a win. 3 points. A platform. Then came Morocco. A narrow defeat. The kind of result that leaves supporters angry because it feels close enough to hurt. Not a collapse, not a humiliation, but a missed opportunity. And at a World Cup, missed opportunities do not stay small for long. They grow. They follow you into the next game. Then came Brazil. A 3-0 defeat against one of football's great powers is not automatically a disgrace. Brazil can do that to good teams. But for Scotland, the problem was not only the scoreline, it was the feeling. The feeling that the tournament had slipped from Scotland's hands before the final whistle had even disappeared into the stadium noise. The feeling that 1 goal across 3 matches was not enough for a side that wanted to break history. The feeling that the expanded World Cup had opened a door, and Scotland had walked up to it without enough threat, enough conviction, or enough control. That phrase matters. Enough control. Because after the Brazil match, Scotland no longer controlled their own story. They were third in the group. But in this new 48-team World Cup, third place does not mean simple survival. It means comparison. It means goal difference. It means goals scored. It means fair play. It means waiting for another group, another stadium, another team's result to decide whether your tournament lives or dies. That is a strange kind of football cruelty. You do your work badly enough to lose control, but not badly enough to go home immediately. So the punishment is suspense. Scotland were not knocked out in one dramatic moment on their own pitch. They were slowly pushed out by the tournament structure itself, as other results turned the key in a door Scotland could no longer reach. And when Croatia's result against Ghana confirmed Scotland could not make the round of 32, the first major consequence came quickly. Steve Clarke stepped down. Now, this is where the story splits in two. On one side, there is Clarke's legacy, and anyone pretending that legacy is worthless is not being serious. Clarke took Scotland back to major tournaments. He gave supporters nights they had been waiting decades to experience. He brought a level of stability to a national team that had spent too long living in disappointment, false starts, and qualifying heartbreak. For a generation of fans, Clarke did not just manage Scotland. He reconnected Scotland with tournament football. That deserves respect. But respect is not the same as immunity. And this is where the Scottish FA has questions to answer. Because before the tournament, the institution chose certainty. It backed Clarke with a new long-term deal. It presented continuity as strength. It looked at the emotional achievement of getting to the World Cup and decided the safest path was to keep the structure intact beyond the summer. There is a logic to that. International football can become chaotic very quickly. If a manager's future is left open, every press conference becomes a referendum. Every team selection becomes political. Every bad result becomes a countdown. The Scottish FA wanted to remove that noise. It wanted to say, this is our manager, this is our plan, and this is not a short-term project. But stability without accountability becomes comfort. That is the line Scotland have to confront now. Stability is valuable when it supports growth. Stability is dangerous when it protects underperformance. And after this World Cup, many supporters will ask a simple question. Why was a new deal signed before the biggest performance review of all? Think about what this actually means. Scotland did not extend Clarke after a strong World Cup. They extended him before seeing whether the team could finally do something no Scotland men's team had ever done at a World Cup. Escape the group stage. That decision now looks less like confidence and more like institutional overprotection. Not because Clarke is a bad manager, he is not, but because timing matters in football governance, and the timing here was impossible to defend once the campaign ended the way it did. The counter-response came from the outside. Supporters, pundits, and the wider football public, not all with the same tone. Some angry, some sad, some grateful, some exhausted. But the message underneath was similar. This could not just be brushed away as bad luck. This could not simply be framed as a proud return after 28 years. Scotland came to the World Cup with a target. They failed to reach it. And when national teams fail at tournaments, someone usually pays the price. That is why Clarke became the first casualty of Scotland's World Cup. Not because his whole reign collapsed into failure, but because the tournament exposed the limit of what his version of Scotland could do. It could qualify, it could organize, it could compete in moments. But when the time came to impose itself, to chase a game, to turn pressure into goals, it did not have enough. Enough control, enough invention, enough edge. This is bigger than one manager, though. The 2026 World Cup format has created a new emotional geography for failure. In the old 32-team format, most teams knew quickly. Top 2, or out. In this version, a third-place team can be alive and dead at the same time. Supporters become spreadsheet watchers. Managers become hostage to other groups. Goal difference becomes destiny. A single extra goal against Haiti. A late equalizer against Morocco. One less mistake against Brazil. Suddenly these details are not details. They are the tournament. For Scotland, that hurts because history has a cruel sense of humor. This country knows all about nearly. In 1974, Scotland famously went unbeaten at the World Cup and still did not advance. In 1998, they were part of the World Cup again, but that campaign also ended at the first stage. Then came the long absence. Years of watching other nations build memories while Scotland built explanations. So when 2026 arrived, it was supposed to be more than participation. The expanded format made progression feel realistic. Not guaranteed, but realistic. That is what made this exit sting. Scotland were not being asked to win the World Cup. They were being asked to survive the first cut. And even with the safety net of third-place qualification, they could not. The stakes now are uncomfortable. The Scottish FA has to find a successor quickly enough to keep momentum, but carefully enough not to repeat the same mistake in reverse. Panic is not strategy. Nostalgia is not strategy either. The next manager will inherit a team that has tasted tournaments again, but also a team that must evolve beyond simply being hard to play against. The next step has to be football with more courage in possession, more threat in the final third, and more flexibility when Plan A does not work. The players are part of this too. Clarke is gone, but the missed chances, cautious passages, and tournament nerves do not disappear with him. International football is harsh because managers become the headline, but players carry the truth on the grass. Scotland's next era cannot be built only on emotion, anthem volume, and traveling support. It has to be built on performance. And the Scottish FA? This is its accountability moment. Not the easy kind where everyone thanks the outgoing manager and moves on. The harder kind. The kind that asks whether decision-makers rewarded comfort too early. The kind that asks whether long-term planning became a shield against hard judgment. The kind that asks whether Scotland's football leadership truly understood the difference between qualifying for a tournament and being ready to progress in one. Because those are not the same thing. So here is the question for every Scotland supporter, and really, for every football fan watching this from the outside. Was this World Cup a failure because Scotland went home? Or was it a failure because Scotland still looked like a team surprised by the standards of the stage it had spent 28 years trying to reach? Was Clarke the problem? Or was he the manager who carried Scotland as far as his methods could take them? And if stability without accountability becomes comfort, what does accountability without a real plan become? That is the danger now. Scotland cannot treat a resignation as a reset button. It is not enough to change the face in the technical area and hope the story changes with it. The next era has to answer the question Clarke's final World Cup left behind. How does Scotland become more than a proud participant? The closing image is not a boardroom statement. It is not a contract document. It is not even the final table. It is a Scotland supporter in a darkened concourse after the dream is over. Scarf still around the neck, phone glowing in one hand, checking the news that the manager who brought them back to this stage is already gone. That is football at its most human. Pride and frustration in the same breath, gratitude and anger in the same walk, back to the train. A long-awaited return that ended not with a roar, but with a resignation. Tell me in the comments, did Steve Clarke deserve to go? Or did the Scottish FA fail him before the tournament even started? If you want more World Cup accountability breakdowns like this, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us, because this tournament is only getting louder from here.